Shall I start?
Mitra.
Hi, Amrita.
There's Amrita.
Amrita is saying hi in the chat.
Hello.
This is Mitra. Hi, Mitra.
Hi.
Hi.
We can start.
Good evening, friends. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on a Thursday rather than a Friday this time. And the reason being that we have gathered today on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of Professor Arvind Adarkar, who has been central to the foundation and inception of the School of Environment and Architecture, which we have all come to know as C. C is 7 years old today. It was one of the few colleges conceived as a place of research and learning. Architecture, which was founded by 8 architects, opened in 2014. The school has come to interrogate and redefine the course of pedagogy and architectural thinking for several institutions across the country in the short time space that it has been around. In this line of work, today is yet another special day, for we have gotten together to announce another initiative by the school in the direction of its deep investment in spatial investigation. I'll leave the details for my colleagues to elaborate upon. I'm just threading together the evening. The structure of this evening will be divided in 2 parts. The first part will be the inauguration of the Center for Spatial Studies, which has been conceptualized as a new space by the school for furthering architectural and spatial research. And the second part of the evening will be a book launch called Multiplicities, which is a collaborative project between Neera Adarkar, Suraj Pandit, and artist Archana Hande. And it's a book on urban cultures of the Mumbai Metropolitan Region. Before we start, I would like to invite I would like to invite our co-founder and trustee, Professor Ravindra Punde, to give an introductory address in the remembrance of Professor Adarkar. So may I please invite Professor Punde to speak a few words.
Thank you, Anuj. Thank you so much. So indeed, today is a great day. And so as Anuj kind of told us that it's Arvind's birthday. And so Arvind Adarkar was the first chairperson of the Society for Environment and Architecture. He was an architect and a leading practitioner at this time. He practiced with 2 other partners, Neera and Arun Kare, and their practice continues to operate as Adarkar Associates till date. Arvind was born in a middle-class family, born in Mumbai, Girgaon, and a complete Mumbai boy in some ways. So that location also had a great mix of literary figures, artists, and lent an opportunity to access some of the cultural life around the city in that environment. So he studied at a multidisciplinary environment, of which still continues to be so, at the School of Art and Architecture, which is the JJ School of Art and Architecture. And in the in the relatively early years as a professional, he was deeply engaged with art and architecture. During the period of 1980 to 2000, shall I say, both Arvind and Neera were active members of a theatre movement in Mumbai and distributed the time between theatre and architecture in the early days. I'm also certain in some ways that the movement in theatre across the globe that picked up at that time issues of the masses and changed the form of theatre itself and brought it to the streets. This was pretty much the Brechtian movement at that time. With Arvind and Neera's thinking, and influenced them both. Both are fairly well-recognized actors and worked closely with some of the eminent theatre personalities like Satyadev Dubey and Amol Palekar. As they also engaged with teaching from 1980 onwards, they actually were at the lead of a new form of thinking in architectural education. So, they in the early period between a group of practitioners who also taught at Academy of Architecture were Dilip Purohit, who was a partner at the Architects Combined, Arun Ogle, Ved Sagan, and many people, and a few of them got together and they formed a group that started rethinking architectural education. They actually formulated new coursework that held a promise of not only making architectural education multidisciplinary, but also opened up the space of social relevance of architecture and urban form and spatiality. They all met every week, I think, at Dilip's house to discuss and formulate this program. With it was the inevitable idea of a new school. That ambitious idea and the questions associated with it is what probably contributed to the formation of the Society of Environment and Architecture today. Societies whose objectives are anchored in education, research, and research of relevance and advocacy. Those are the three essential pillars of the Society of Environment and Architecture, as you know. Arvind also wrote extensively, and he wrote in both English and Marathi. And I think he wanted to take these issues of urban life to the common man. And his forums were local language newspapers and magazines that had a great outreach. At a personal level, I actually hope, and I hope I can push the society at some point to put together his writings, not only because he was our guide and mentor at the society, but to get a deeper understanding of how some of the key issues were perceived then by public intellectuals. Another interesting, I think Arvind was a people's man. Perhaps that could also be the reason for the choices he made. While being a professional practitioner, he chose to spend time on issues of larger common good. Around that time, the Charles Correa proposal on the mill land opened up a multifaceted discourse on the issues of land distribution, rights of the underprivileged, and the city's open space system, to just name a few. While it is Arvind's birthday today, and I'm speaking about Arvind, it would be grossly unfair to leave out Neera's contribution to this movement. And much more on the other fronts. Her movement, her contribution is quite a bit on the fronts of gender equity and social justice. While both were closely associated with the movement, they created a new space yet again at the Academy of Architecture by the name of Mumbai Study Group, initiated by Arvind, Daryl DeMonte, our own Pankaj Joshi, who's also a trustee of the society and a teacher at the school, and Shekhar Krishnan. This was to be not just a multidisciplinary group, but brought all classes and communities from the elite, senior bureaucrats, mill workers, and community leaders and common man, and students both local and international, to appreciate each other's viewpoints and exchange ideas of a common future. Interestingly enough, while this group met every Saturday at Academy of Architecture, it did not acquire a formal institutional structure. It was a result of a kind of openness it needed for a new understanding of our urban space and its politics. The openness was, of course, coupled by a deep understanding of the dots it connected. Arvind had this quiet ability. He knew what it takes to generate such an energy, what to leave out. I cannot not talk of Arvind's ability to connect with people. There is hardly any occasion that I have come across with him where he has met a person for the first time and not traced his connection, often to his ancestral home. He would bring joy to the room with stories and humor and make instant strong bonds. Such was his memory, love, and care for people. I knew about him when I was a student at AOA. I think both Arvind and Neera had started teaching at the academy around 1980, and that was my final year. I then met him in 2009 when he, as secretary of the Academy of Architecture, interviewed me for the post of a principal. Later, we shared a room as principals of the two sections of the architectural school, and this is where we started speaking of the idea of the new school once again. When I think back, I wonder if he yet again connected some dots and put together a diverse group of practitioners separated by decades, each covering a spectrum of age and experience spread over 3 decades and varying disciplines. Arvind's openness, ability to connect and care for all, coupled with the quiet ambition to interrogate the present for a larger common good, remains the core value of the Society of Environment and Architecture. It is only befitting then that we launch the center and Neera's book that inspires a new reading of the city. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravi, to trace that lovely remembrance of Arvind, and I'm sure that everyone will resonate with what you have said. And with this, in respect of time, I would like to move ahead and now invite Prasad, Rupali, Rohit, and Shreyang to talk about the center and the Center for Spatial Studies and its objectives, the idea behind its inception, and the activities that it hopes to partake. So, Prasad, over to you.
Thanks, Anuj. So I'm Prasad Chetty, and I work at C. And it's indeed a very important occasion for C, because we are embarking on this new initiative of creating and consolidating an academic space. So I welcome all of you again on behalf of the trustees and faculty of C to inaugurate the Center for Spatial Studies. It's a move from being an educational institution to an academic space, from an institution to a space. And the framework is expected to be a non-asset centric, non-certification centric in its post-institutional form, and an ideas-driven space for practice of space itself. And it is expected to have a experimental and exploratory charge. It is soft and it is blurry, and it wishes to be like that, so that it can hold many diverse energies and vectors together, many practices together. What I'll do is I'll invite my 3 other colleagues, Rupali Gupte, Rohit Muzumdar, and Shreyang Khemlapure, to lay out some of the vectors which shaped this idea, which we've been thinking since quite some time, since last 2 years actually, and then go into discussing the activities and the ambitions of the center subsequently. So with this, I want to invite Rupali to kind of first speak about reclaiming the academic space. Rupali.
Thanks. So I'll just kind of articulate some of the ambitions that are shaping the center. So the Center of Spatial Studies is, like everyone has said, is an initiative of the Society for Environment and Architecture. And I'll probably kind of lay out 5 different sort of ambitions, trajectories, questions that it's trying to draw out. I think the first most important question for us is the shift from what we understand as a purely educational space, which in many ways, in India for sure, but I know in many other places also, has become more of a teaching space in a coaching class kind of model. So we're kind of thinking of moving this idea of from a purely educational space to an academic space. Okay, and I'll kind of try and articulate this idea of the academic space. By an academic space, what we argue is that it is a space where you ask questions, where you formulate new ideas, you test new frameworks, but also build friendships and companionships where you think together. And this is the space we're launching today. The second coordinate I'd like to specify is that the center is also in some ways made of people. I think our people become important infrastructures in the center. And these are not only teachers who are imparting knowledge to students as a kind of one-way process, but also instrumental in generating new knowledge, producing this vibrant academic space, and in some ways creating a collective of many practices. We see this as a collective, the center as a collective of many practices where people are testing out new frameworks. It is also a collaborative space with students becoming equal partners as companions in these endeavors. Being part of a collaborative networked space. So we're not only looking at the space as this sort of bubble that kind of exists, within itself, but also as a collaborative space where we network with other people across the world. So in some ways, we're asking, what is this kind of idea of a flat organization? CSS, the Center for Spatial Studies, proposes to be this experimental institutional frame, which is more than an institution, an infrastructure of friendship. And within this, we have currently articulated 5 research verticals. One is a kind of vertical around housing and emerging urbanism. The second one is around the South Asian architecture and urbanism. The third is around environment and spatiality. The fourth around material pedagogies. And the fifth around visual culture. Now, what we've done is this collective, this present collective who you're seeing here on the screen as well, the faculty of C has structured their current research interests around these. These also become nodes in many ways for various courses to pass through and for hypotheses to be tested. We hope to build from this an active, agile, and growing academic space through which the center also proposes to blur the boundaries between academic space, practice, and various sort of initiatives of individuals and collectives. The third coordinate is that the role of academia is in some ways through the center extended to become a cultural practice. Okay, and by this we mean we also have an ambition to connect to a kind of to society at various levels. Again, rather than sort of looking at the role of the teacher as someone who kind of preaches and teaches, to work with the kind of experimental, speculative, cultural logic, where in some ways you are producing and validating new knowledge structures, and in some ways also becoming instrumental in some ways creating that new knowledge. The fourth tenet, I would say, is that while academic space is this kind of space of education and research, we also want to locate it within a set of long durée questions. And I think that becomes more important to us because in some ways we see ourselves otherwise moving from project to project. And we see this initiative as something that is capable of holding these long durée questions, of sort of creating these trajectories that are driven by questions, and in some ways a kind of collective participating in that. And the fifth one, I'll end with this, is that in some ways what we've been articulating in our discussions also is that there has been a in some ways an institutional hijack of spatial studies. One where, it's either space. I mean, I know that the idea of space in some ways conjures for us a kind of idea of a terrestrial space in some ways. But space also gets kind of, in some ways, limited to ways of thinking of cartographies, often GIS-based cartographies or statistical models. But we want to, in some ways, think of the Center for Spatial Studies extending these epistemes to start looking at other ways of thinking of space, poetic spatialities, the idea of lived experiences, which in many ways get missed out. And in some ways, we believe that in missing out some of these epistemes, we create highly impoverished spaces. And that we also argue are, in some ways, create a lack of spatial justice in the long run. And so with that in mind, we would like to extend the center into kind of experimenting with multiple trajectories of thinking of space and questions around them in tandem, very closely in tandem with the School of Environment and Architecture. So with that, I'll invite Shreyank to articulate some of the questions around some of the institutional frameworks through which we are thinking of the Center for Spatial Studies.
Thanks, Rupali, and thanks, Prasad. It's a pleasure, just to introduce this Center for Spatial Studies and be part of this discussion. First of all, congratulations to all the background team that and the background effort that everybody has put, and especially Vastavikta, Moomal, and Prasad, they're relentlessly working day in and day out to put together this beast of a thing. So I'll start with that note, and let me add to what Rupali was saying. I'll try to sketch out three coordinates which will help us perhaps get a sense of the landscape of what Prasad, Rupali have called as a post-institutional turn. And I think locating the Center for Spatial Studies in this landscape of the post-institutional. The first coordinate, we are all familiar with it. We are all living it at the moment, is the proliferation of several thousands of online courses that bombard our social media platforms, our emails, etc. on a daily basis, right? And that's one of the aspects that has become so normal today that every institution inevitably, because of the pandemic, has pushed itself to create this kind of a kind of an ecology of online courses, workshops, lectures, you name it, right? It's kind of this immense proliferation of let's say online material available for anybody and everybody to pursue, let's say, whatever they wish to study. And in theory, with all these online material, it is technically possible to kind of for oneself to perhaps spend an entire lifetime engaging with this material itself without setting a foot in any institution, so to speak. So that's the first coordinate that I want to sketch about this landscape that we are inhabiting. The second is on the status of universities and large institutions today. I think to continue Rupali's point, for example, take in March 2021, the UGC announced that universities across India can grant students up to 40% of their credits by taking online courses. And that's a big move, right? Because what you're saying is that there is the possibility of higher education is not only located in educational institutions per se or universities themselves, but now has also shifted to this online courses, and they're all valid forms of learning. Now, many of the deemed to be universities in Bombay and across the country are also enthusiastic about this shift, which arises, which kind of gives rise to a couple of questions. One is, what will the faculties, the educators employed by the university do in that 40% of the time, right? So you have 40% free time, so what would you do in that case? The second condition that it kind of gives, or rather the second question that it arises is, well, if 40% of credits or any learning for that matter can take place online, what exactly is the role and the place of university today? And it's a big question to ask, perhaps something that shakes the foundations and the grounds on which, let's say, modern universities, at least in the last 200 years, have been actually established on. To this, let's say, aspect of the shift towards online learning and online education, we're all familiar with, let's say, at least in the last few years, newspaper articles after newspaper articles have shown us that the enrollment in technical education, technical courses rather, has declined substantially across many institutions. Many colleges and institutions have even shut down many of the technical courses. Now, in that sense, one really wonders what's really happening with the scope of the higher educational institutions in themselves. I think my guess, so to speak, is the model in which the university is also fashioned in many parts of India, actually. So for instance, let's say if you take many states, there is a central university which kind of affiliates multiple institutions and colleges to it. So in a sense, universities have become rather fashioned themselves as affiliation providers rather than centers which ask new questions about the world or provide new knowledges to the world. So that's probably one of the the starting point, or let's say that coordinate of situating the university as a affiliation provider rather than asking a place where one can ask new questions has become, let's say, one of the problematic aspects which probably sees this shift or decline in the status of universities today. The third coordinate that I would like to sketch is on the questions of autodidacts and visceral learning. Now, where does this come from? For instance, in the online symposium organized by C, titled Post Institution, in February this year, two things were shared by all the four panels. The first one was to give more space for visceral learning, which is beyond scientific frameworks, or at least accommodate for a hybrid framework of learning which took into account artistic, experiential, along with the scientific frameworks and methods. Now, the second aspect that these four panels shared between them was the fact that regardless of the discipline, right, regardless of the discipline that anybody came from to that panel, everybody was either speaking of spaces or objects of the habitat and the world, right? So in the sense that it does not really matter if you're an architect, artist, engineer, but we are all in some sense speaking about the space that we inhabit and the world that we inhabit. So this is not simply, in a sense, an interdisciplinary moment, which we saw quite a bit in the 90s, but a moment that clearly marks a disregard for disciplines and puts a higher regard to the question and to the questions and the passions that drive the individual or the group. Something like akin to what Ravi was speaking about, let's say, in Arvind's case, right? And Arvind's and Neera's case, where there was something which kind of, drove them to kind of reformulate, rethink education, so to speak, broadly. Now, this shift from, let's say, interdisciplinary to a kind of a disregard for disciplines themselves, one can say that one can call this moment as the moment of, let's say, the autodidacts, so to speak, maybe a new version of autodidacts, maybe a new framework or a new environment within which the autodidacts are proliferating, so to speak. In that sense, one can say that autodidacts are the group of people who do not necessarily adhere to or partake in current institutional frameworks. And in some sense, this is the group or the community that the Center for Spatial Studies is actually wants to engage with, like anybody and any whoever wishes to kind of learn with us. Now, I mean, there are a couple of things that I want to add, but keeping time in mind, what I would just want to maybe add one more point to this is that we see that more and more people are kind of willing to not accept the world as a given, right? So particularly by the institutional frameworks. More and more people are willing to experience the world for themselves, render everything in doubt, relook at everything anew. And it is not surprising, given the situation, that even the established frameworks of something like critical theory today is cast in doubt. there is a radical opening to mobilize ideas like feelings, love, friendship, care, and other affective modes of engaging with things and world around us. And I think that's one of the factors that Rupali also brought in her discussion just before. So this is once again, corroding the establishment of universities, which took pride, in their scientific and empirical learning for the last 200 years at least. With that, I think with these three coordinates, we can say that, or this partial sketch, we can say that the Center for Spatial Studies is located in this kind of a landscape which is determined by, or let's say, constituted by autodidacts who are interested in kind of self-learning on their own terms. Secondly, that the status of the universities today are crumbling, and lastly, let's say the proliferation of online courses and resources have given much needed boost for this environment of autodidacts and self-learning. Yeah, so with that, I'll invite maybe Rohit to share his thoughts about.
Thanks, Shreyang. Thanks. Yeah, with Rupali's and Shreyang's, the points that they have made, I'd just like to add one point. I'd just like to make one point about the location of the Center for Spatial Studies and its cultural location. I mean, I'll speak about it from the point of its cultural location. And there is one specific point that I'd like to make. In thinking about cultural location, the terms North and South play a very important role in the politics of global knowledge production. Many scholars have written about how urban space in the South, about the space of cities, villages, all kinds of peripheries, has been written for a long, long time through narratives of lack, of crisis. And over the last 2 decades, scholars, academics, all kinds of researchers and practitioners have tried to push back this kind of narrative of space that has emerged. And this a lot been spoken about it. How do we write about or how do we think about space that we inhabit beyond narratives of lack or crisis, particularly at a moment when we seem to be located in one all across the world. But beyond that, within the context of Bombay, the term North and South becomes interesting because it starts getting upturned. The city of Bombay and the way it has been organized over the last century until the late 20th century, the spaces of cultural exchange all seem to be happening or taking place in the southern part of the city of Bombay. The spaces of museums, art galleries, public lectures, exhibitions, state designated sites of protest, work, all of them were located in the so-called city, which was in the south. The suburbs were the space of residence, and in that sense, not a space of any cultural production per se. We never heard of lectures or exhibitions or performances, apart from some occasional local ones, taking place in the suburbs. I think with the School of Environment and Architecture, now its ambition growing into the Center for Spatial Studies, our ambition has been to think through how to think of our own physical and socio-economic location in the suburbs as a site, as a cultural location. The space that we are located in has several fishing villages, agricultural villages, which are now a part of the city area. Housing, diverse kinds of housing ranging from chawls, so-called slums, to wadas and wadis, low-rise, high-rise apartments, bungalows, or diverse kinds of housing types, closely kind of packed together in land which is privately plotted, state plotted, non-plotted subdivisions, and even on environmental commons. And this environmental setting over here, in the space, the physical space, where the Center of Cultural Studies, Center for Spatial Studies is located. And although Shreyank has spoken about it being a location that is multi-sited, but where we are located in this School of Environment and Architecture, it's environmental landscape, the terrain, the aqueous terrain that it kind of sits in. It's National Park on one side, where one of the rivers of Bombay moves west towards the Gorai Creek. It's located in a very interesting environmental context. Much of the environmental and ecological debate in Mumbai over the last couple of years seems to be shifting gear into thinking about what might happen in the context of sea level rise. And this particular context becomes a very interesting space to explore the relationships with nature or environment. And we at the School of Environment and Architecture have come to see our environment as relationships that humans form with one another, or what they pay attention to one another in their habitat, as well as to things in their habitat, along with more than human forms of life. So this is the physical space, this is the social space of the suburbs that we are situated in, which for a long time has not been seen as a cultural location. This place also has 27 schools, out of which 4 schools are architecture colleges. There are also engineering and management colleges in our surroundings, along with several primary and high school and junior colleges. While these institutions have largely performed the role of becoming spaces of imparting education, in positing the idea of Center for Spatial Studies, we want to see and explore not only how we might think of new forms of knowledge production, what kind of new knowledge needs to be produced, but also how might we kind of engage through this knowledge production in advocacy, collaboration, forms of communicative action through the context that we are situated in. So yeah, that's the point that I wanted to make. Thanks. I'll invite Prasad
Thanks.
to share.
Thanks, Rupali. Thanks, Shreyank, and thanks, Rohit, to kind of, lay out for us the context which kind of produced the idea for the center. Now, we have been also discussing the idea of the term center, because, and Shreyank keeps on arguing, it's not a center. Basically, we're thinking of a network, we're thinking of a fluid form. Where is the center? And same thing with Rohit, kind of, where is the center? It's more of a node, I would say. Think of it as a node where, which kind of, through which practices pass and people pass and other flows kind of, pass through. But I think what is important to kind of, point at this moment is the relationship between knowledge form, understanding or validation methods, the way we understand things and what we understand about cities, habitations, spaces. Now, that and its relationship to the form of the institution. And I think that's an important relationship. All three of them are trying to kind of put together. The relationship between the form of the institution, which is basically the institutional structure, hierarchies, funding mechanisms, certification structures, approval systems, publishing, imperatives, all of that. The institutional form and its relationship to the understanding of our lives, to the way we kind of articulate our positions, our kind of way we kind of see cities and see habitation. I think that relation is something which needs some exploration, and we've been kind of spending time in trying to understand that relationship. And one of the things that kind of comes across is that the contemporary, like Jiang said, or even Rupali kind of mentioned, the contemporary is kind of appears to be too incoherent, too fuzzy, to be held through the frameworks of these institutions to be understood. And like, for example, how do we kind of think of cities today? We think of southern cities. Rohit kind of mentions the idea of southern places, southern cities. We think of them in terms of deficiencies, in terms of degradations, in terms of informalities, in terms of where do these narratives come from? Where do these kind of and this is more than 2/3 of Earth's human habitation. This is the center. This is where urbanity happens. And we have no frameworks to kind of understand it beyond what the more or less, I would say, the colonial, which kind of evolved into a entrepreneurial academia. For example, in India itself, if you look at architectural education, for the first 40 years after independence, the schools of architecture were produced, were set up by state institutions, by states, and some philanthropic organizations. Between the next 20 years, between 1990 and 2010, it was largely the developers and the politicians who were setting up institutions. And the institutions doubled. In the last 10 years, things have shifted completely. It is mainstream business houses which are setting up institutions. Education, from being a philanthropic social activity, has become an entrepreneurial endeavor. And in this, and see establish itself in these times, a group of 8 architects, 4 practices basically coming without support of any politician, nor developer, nor business house, just with friendships. And I think it's important to mention Arvind here, because he kind of was able to concentrate these friendships and consolidate them to kind of become what he is today. We talk of friendship a lot in at sea. I think it is Arvind's legacy or idea that an institution built around friendships, and therefore kind of what more apt moment than his 75th birthday to kind of inaugurate this center. What I'll do now is I will show you the center, the website at the moment. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dipti, will you please share the website in the chat box?
Yeah.
So the Centers for Spatial Studies is primarily an initiative of the Society of Environment and Architecture, which is a group of people, and it is imagined as this node for intersection of spatial practices to create an ecosystem of experimental research, open pedagogy, and collaborative production of knowledge. Who is the center at the moment? At the moment, it is all of these people. And the idea over here is to kind of think of this space as not a physicality, but it could take up, it would, but it is a space where set of practices concentrate. And we allow other practices, or the space is really built through many other practices passing through this space. So we have artists, urbanists, product designers, we'll discuss Neera more in detail here, but designers, architects having a social orientation, conservation architects, urbanists, environmentalists, urbanists, artists, environmental specialists, housing experts, landscape architects, artists. So this is the people at the moment. This will only grow. And it has two things at the moment. We do, it's a space of research. And at the moment, there are 6 clusters: housing and urbanization, which is looking very closely at the question of urbanization from here, looking at land and property, looking at the urbanization in the second cities. What does it mean? Because after 2011, everybody said urbanization has shifted to second cities. What does it really mean? What is happening? What are the mechanics? The emerging housing context. For the last 50 years, more than 50 years now, we've had a huge, a series of housing policies, hundreds of them. And in 2011 census itself, we kind of concluded that there is a shortage of 18 million houses in the country, despite of 50 years of active policy. We look at repair and retrofitting. No college, no architectural institution, no engineering institution in the country today teaches repair and retrofitting. We want to develop a course around it. We want to, and this is a country of repair. This is a country of retrofit. It doesn't fall within any pedagogic agendas, and therefore there are no systems. There is no thinking, and there is no structures to hold it. So we already opened 2 years of work. There's already 2 years of work on repair and retrofit so far. And finally, making home the spatial history of the city of Mumbai through its housing. Mumbai has 2,000 years of history, and we will discuss it in the next panel. But the whole point is that there is a huge number of housing available in this city. Similarly, we have another vertical on South Asian architecture and urbanism. Why South Asia? Because I think in terms of regional thinking is important, because we're sharing histories, we are sharing geographies, we are sharing cultures. And it's important to think in terms of spatiality of the region, of the subcontinent, rather than, I mean, limiting ourselves to national discussions. We have an active vertical around environment and spatiality. The focus is to look at what the climate change brigade is not looking at, and that is the everyday. So when we speak of water, we don't speak of floods necessarily, but also about everyday wetness, the wetness that happens in leakages and seepages. We talk of environment in terms of care. We talk of ways in which we can think of environment beyond its science hijack, because we feel that there's a science hijack of environment. We have an active cluster around alternative materials and technology. I mean, this is really one of our colleagues wanting to cook architecture, figuring out a way in which architecture can be produced literally in the kitchen. So and looking at it in political terms, it would mean that how do we kind of rethink or renegotiate the industrial hijack or the modern methods or processes of producing built form? How do we rethink it and bring it to individual hands, to an individual bodies to kind of be able to produce built form? There's an active module around visual culture, because we think that it is the way we draw things is the way we understand, and the way we understand is the way we kind of think and imagine interventions. And we feel that the way we understand space today through its orthographies and cartographies has shaped the way we understand space, and that has produced a kind of spatiality which is which has its own kind of limitations. If we rethink the way in which we think of space, which is about rethinking cartographies and orthographies, then what would be the way? What would be the spatiality of that? So this cluster really looks at the questions of visual culture, the question of image also. And finally, there is this ongoing project around the pandemic, which is the COVID glossary, which is itself an effort by the school to collect stories. So far, there are 400 stories of the pandemic, which is kind of put together in this website. And lastly, I would want to also talk about pedagogy, which is the second activity the center intends to do and will do, is around the idea of open pedagogy. And we invite, again, anybody and everybody to join courses, modules, pedagogy offered by the center. We have modules around spatial history of humanity, contemporary architecture and its practice, South Asian and Indian architecture. Remember, this is all coming from our internal works, the works of the center. Theoretical orientations and practices of space, urbanization and experiences, the housing question, the emerging housing questions, and environment and spatiality, spatial research and pedagogy. So these are the 8 core modules which we will do every year. And each of these modules are 24 hours long, offered online. And along with it, there are dates also and schedules also mentioned. Along with it, we will also have special modules which people from inside the school want to test hypotheses, want to experiment with certain courses. It's a shorter course. We invite also scholars and people from anywhere else to kind of offer these courses, much shorter courses, more of testing hypotheses about the world. So that is the ambition and activity of the center. And then we have this ambition of setting up the collaborative academia, which we will kind of uh, uh, elaborate soon and open up soon. So that is the center of spatial studies. I will close now. It's already 5:30 and the second panel is due. But if there are any responses and questions, which I don't see on the chat, definitely.
Isaac, who's raised his hand.
Sorry?
Somebody in the attendee, Isaac Matthews, raised their hand.
Isaac has raised the hand. Oh, that's a mistake. Okay. So we are really short of time and all of those things. But I think the center has an ambition at the moment, has a plan to kind of rethink the idea of institution, the idea of knowledge, the idea of practice, the idea of academic practice, etc., etc., etc. And we welcome everybody to kind of join forces and build this build the center further. With that, I will close the session, and we will take a very short break. This platform will remain open. The Zoom platform will remain open. We will just shift people from the audience to the panelists and vice versa. And we will do a release of a very important book for Bombay, on Bombay, by Neera in another 5 minutes. We will gather in another 5 minutes. Dipti, we'll close, stop recording at the moment. Thank you. Take a 5 minutes break.
Hi. Can you hear?
Yes, yes. Oh, Suraj is looking completely different.
I know, I didn't recognize him.
It's pandemic. Hi.
Archana also has a very smart haircut.
Yes.
Hi, Paroma.
Hi.
Long time.
Long time.
But I just feel Suraj's pandemic is going like this.
So,
With the
all of
hair.
us are into some nice haircut.
Yeah, I think
Very
after
nice.
before the third wave, we thought let's have a good haircut.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are you all?
Good,
Hi,
good.
Neera. Hi, Archana.
Hi.
Hi.
How are you is a very tricky question.
How are your parents, Archana?
They're better now. They recovered. They were suffering with COVID. So now
Hey,
little.
the voice is it breaking?
Can
Is
you
her
hear?
voice breaking?
Your voice not breaking.
Really, not really.
It's breaking.
Is it now clear?
It's very clear, Neera. It's from your side. It will improve.
It's from my side.
Yeah, it will improve.
I don't know. It says
Rejoin maybe.
We'll wait for another 2 minutes,
Yes.
and we will start. I mean, there are already 130.
Hi, Amita.
Hi,
Archana.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, good. Well,
Just check.
Hi, Mitra. Long
So
time.
great.
Hello.
Full team is here then. Very nice.
okay. So how are we going about? It's too late to ask.
We'll go about. We'll do it informally. I mean, I mean, all of you all have worked for I think more than 7 years on the book. So
Yes.
yeah, so you don't need to do anything more other than just kind of talk of some moments of those 7 years. So we'll start now. We'll start, and I think
Prasad ji, I think you should tell us how much time we should have to talk, because 7 years and we have so many memories.
so we'll do it around 4 points around archaeological evidences, form, the ambition of the book, and the methods. And we'll have a lead speaker in each. Suraj Pandit Archana on form, Suraj Pandit on archaeological evidences, Mitra on the methods, and Neera on the ambitions. And everybody else can kind of join around. So I suggest the lead speakers could take between 5 to 7 minutes on articulating, and we'll see remaining 3-4 minutes on for everybody else. Okay, so that's the plan. Dipti, should we start?
Yeah, I'll just set up the record.
Yeah.
So you're going to ask me the background, no? The background of this project.
I will also.
We can start.
So welcome back, everybody. Those who were there in the earlier session of the inauguration of the Center for Spatial Studies, and welcome everybody who's joined for this session. This is an important day for C. It's Arvind Adarkar's 75th birthday, and we've just inaugurated the Center for Spatial Studies. My name is Prasad Shetty, and I work with C. I welcome all of you again. to the academic launch of this book, Multiplicities by Neera Adarkar, in collaboration with Suraj Pandit and Archana Hande, the designer of the book. All three of them are here, along with Neera Mukherjee Parekh, and also Paroma Sadhana, Swapnil Gole, and Amita Sardesai are also here, who have been, who've been with the project for I think 7-8 years, all of them together. So I think they are also meeting each other for after a long time, because after the book was prepared, I know that it took so much more time to for it to come to form, and then so much more time for it to get released, etc., etc., etc. What I'll do is I'll introduce each of the panelists today, and also speak a little bit about the book. Meanwhile, I would suggest Dipti, can you show some visuals of the book parallelly while we speak about the book? I mean, it's a visual book, so it's 400 pages of delight actually, and it's and so we thought that we'll present some visuals of the book. If you want to go to the presentation now. So Neera Adarkar is an architect and has been involved with several workers and women's movement in the city. She is also the chairperson of C. Suraj Pandit is an archaeologist and heads the Department of Ancient Indian Culture and Buddhist Studies at Sakhe College here in Mumbai. Neera Mukherjee Parekh is a cultural theorist and has been the head of the Department of English at the Ascendant University. Along with them, we have Paroma Sadhana, who's a writer and an editor, Amita Sardesai, who is an architect and researcher, and Swapnil Gole, who is also an architect and a researcher. This is an important book. We speak of 7 cities of Delhi, but this book puts together Mumbai as a palimpsest of more than 10 cities over 2000 years. It speaks of traders, monks, saints, warriors, landlords, colonial officers, politicians, trade union leaders, mill workers. It speaks of caves and temples and chawls and banks and schools and monuments and public spaces. And puts together for the first time, I guess, a socio-spatial history of the city. The book is an initiative of the Mumbai Metropolitan Region Heritage Conservation Society, and it has been published by them. The MMR Heritage Conservation Society was established by the Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority, or the MMRDA. The society itself is a very unique organization, sitting inside a state apparatus and governed by not only a group of administrators and technocrats, but also scholars and activists from the civil society. The book was released to the public earlier this year by the Honorable Chief Minister of Maharashtra. The book is introduced by the Metropolitan Commissioner of Mumbai. And the foreword for the book is written by Dr. J.P. Jamkhedkar, probably, and I think Suraj will agree, that probably the tallest figure in archaeology in the state today. So here is the book. I'm just going to show. It's really a tomb, large, it's heavy. It's priced very, very competitively. It's available on Amazon. It's around 400 pages, and it's a very, very visual book. Every page opens, any page you open, it's a very visual book. It's kind of a delight really to go through it. So what we'll do is we'll we'll talk about this book around 4 points, and I'll invite all of you to kind of speak about it with one lead speaker. I will start with Neera, because you anchored, you wrote chapters, you coordinated, you literally lived through this production actually. And it was difficult. I know this very well actually. It's not an easy book to produce because of one of logistical issues, but also the whole theoretical grasp, of thinking of 2,000 years and this geography, and how do we kind of put archaeology and social processes together. So I want to talk a little bit about the ambition of this this book, and also about the journey of making this book. So I want to invite Neera to kind of speak about the book, its ambition, its journey, and everybody else to follow on Neera. Yeah, Neera.
Okay, thanks, Prasad. It's really, I'm very, very happy that the first launch of the book is happening on the platform of our own school. Of course, the formal release took place by MMRDA, but this is kind of a first launch. Okay, to talk about somewhat the background of this book, that over the last 20 years, Heritage Society of MMRDA, which Prasad just elaborated upon, had appointed some consultants to identify the sites of heritage importance and list them in the entire Mumbai Metropolitan Region. Now, this Mumbai Metropolitan Region can be also called Mumbai region, so we can say Mumbai region as well. And this was, and this region, at the time of doing the book, it was like more than 4,000 square kilometers. Now it's further expanded, and the expanse was say in the north Alibag, in the southwest Mumbai and the suburbs, and on the east side Kalyan and Karjat and so on. So the outcome of this project of listing was very interesting. I mean, there were really 2,800 sites which were discovered, in the entire region, and very diverse genres scattered all over the region. Of course, 1/3 were almost in the Mumbai, in the city of Mumbai and the suburbs. So, and it covered the span of 2,500 years. So it was a very very precious kind of repertoire that the Heritage Society of MMRDA possessed. But the brief, the initial brief was to make a synoptic document, and the synoptic document probably meant making a synopsis or shortlisting it or categorizing it under types or under dynasties and so on. But when we actually went through this, the documentation of these sites, and did further research on that, and we realized that just cataloging was not going to do justice to this kind of treasure, and therefore we thought of it won't do justice to the region also. So perhaps we should look at more denser, more deeper approaches, and this kind of and some substantial trajectory or and canvas, so to say, to connect all these various sites. Now, during this time, we used to have discussions, and in one of the discussions, Dr. Jamkhedkar, Suraj, I think Archana was also there, and our research team. And Suraj shared with us the story of Sopara town. And this Sopara town, in 2050 BC, when Sopara town today, it's a suburb of Mumbai, and we call it Nala Sopara. But it was, and he told us that it was a very thriving trading port, and an urban center. And it kind of dawned upon us that when the island city of Mumbai, which was which is considered as the epitome of urbanization, and when it was nothing more than marshy land and mosquitoes and jungles and animals and so on, not even 100 kilometers away, I think 75 kilometers away from these islands, was this Sopara town, and Sopara, very bustling international port. It traded with Arabia and Rome and Egypt and China, and imported horses, exported peacocks and birds and spices and precious stones and so on. So it was amazing, and this was 2,500 years ago. That Archana in this book has done it's a lovely drawing of this route, this trade route. We just saw that, and so there was this. And there was similar urban centers, as we learned, that Canary Caves and a cluster of Canary Caves, then the island of Bharapuri, or island of Elephanta, as we call, and then there were Thane, Kalyan, Vasai, all of them were urban centers, and they all shared most of the parameters associated with urbanization. So there were multiple histories, there were economies, there were infrastructures. I mean, Canary has a very evolved system of water ducts, and of course the settlements of multicultural migrants which were coming and going. And so these stories, we thought, had to be told, and therefore it kind of emerged out as a book, as a volume, and not just as a dense catalog. This actually challenged, I mean, all this research and the documentation actually challenged the centrality of Bombay, because we was only associated something like urban or urbanity with the Western or colonial modernity. This was, and what was emerging was very different. So we decided to use the lens of urbanization, and for this book, we also thought that there has to be some substantial kind of orbit. So that's what the urbanization becomes an orbit here. The selection of sites were very tricky, because there were some interesting sites, but there was no social or cultural history of it, so we had to research it. On the other hand, we found some interesting histories, but and then we had to actually look for the appropriate sites. There were sources other than architecture also, and very interesting, and I hope Suraj mentions that in his talk now, that Sopara's history is actually depicted in a drawing, in a beautiful narration through the story of the protagonist Punna, and this drawing is based on the painting which is in one of the Ajanta caves, and thanks to Suraj, we actually got it from Dr. Shingloff without, I mean, he just happily shared it. So there was a lot of to and fro. The process was not linear, and balancing the visual content and the textual content was also very tricky things. So and of course, it's a visual book, but we didn't want to make it. It's not a coffee table book. It has a lot of text, and but we wanted to balance it in such a way that it becomes easy for the reader. Like it was a non-linear process. It was also there was no singular understanding. I mean, no singular understanding of a particular religion or a region. There was. For example, we could not club the communities, and I'll just give you quickly the examples of the Jew community. The first wave of the Jew migration happened in 12th century, and later these were Bene Israeli who adopted the local language Marathi, and then the Baghdadi Jews who came during the colonial times, and they were rich. They built rich businesses. They had They owned the textile mills, they built schools and so on. But there's a lot of, I mean, the class really has completely divided these two communities. And when we had gone to one of the synagogues in the inner mohalla of Agripada and Madanpura, Archana and I had gone there, and then we saw and we met, and there was a marriage ceremony happening, and one of the persons there told me in Marathi that his grandfather was not given admission in the schools, one of the Jew schools built by these Sassoons, because of this, because they the grandfather could not match the class. So I will just share 3 findings from this book, and I'll stop. So there were some significant findings. The first one I have shared, that it has challenged the centrality of Mumbai, and we have now positioned it in the larger picture of the Mumbai Metropolitan Region. Then it challenges the simplistic association of urban cultures with colonial modernity. Secondly, it questions the notion of heritage itself, and expands the criteria for heritage identification, much beyond monumentality and much beyond, let me say, the colonial facades of the port precinct in the island city. Thirdly, the last, I would like to endorse what Romila Thapar has mentioned. Romila Thapar has written very little on North Konkan, but in one of her articles, she mentions that the history of North Konkan region lacks any kind of cultural homogeneity, and this is exactly what is coming out of our book. The book brings to light that the composite cultures and the plurality emerges as the defining feature of the book as well as of the region. I think I'll stop here, and we can take questions.
Thanks, Neera. Amita, you want to, because you have been accompanying these journeys with Neera. I mean, conceptual journeys as well as actual project journeys. Amita, you want to talk of any story that you want to kind of, because before this project, you all also kind of, re-evaluated, Amita or Swapnil both actually, re-evaluated the heritage list, so to say, of Mumbai, and kind of, expanded it from 600 and to 1,700 sites, and then nobody knew what to do, because how can there be so many heritage sites? So what happens to the exclusivity of heritage and stuff like that? So these were the discussions that went on. Any of you all want to respond, Swapnil or Amita, or at this moment? Otherwise, we'll kind of invite. Okay, I'll invite.
I would like to say that even the work on the book started 7 years back, but for us it started in 2003. Like when the proposal for a book came from MMRDA, it was like we went through all the sites which we had physically visited during the course for the project of heritage listing which we had done. So it was again like revisiting all the thoughts, all the processes, finding out photographs, again running around. Okay, that ma'am used to tell me this photo is not proper, you have to go and photograph another this thing again. So we have rephotographed a lot of buildings in this process again, probably for the second or the third time, but it was fun doing this exercise.
Yeah, I'm sure there's all that intensity. And Neera, I mean how can administrative boundaries of Mumbai city, or anything kind of grasp within them the entire space and time of this region? Really, how can logistical administrative boundaries, which are on map, even conceive of these histories? So I want to kind of and I think Suraj has been one of the most important anchors of this project as well as this book, and he contributes the first 4 chapters of the book. And I think one of the things the book deals with is the incoherence of material, of archaeological material, and the way texts and stories and myths are brought together and tied together to form evidences, but also non-evidences to kind of hold the history of the city together, in its 2,500 years. Suraj, you want to come in and speak a little bit about the archaeological methods and the difficulties of this incoherent material, and also thinking about how do you kind of put this incoherent material together, because you have the story of Purna, you have things from China entering in, and the book is it's a pleasure to kind of look at the references that it makes across variety of time and space. Actually, Suraj.
Thank you, Prasad. Let me first thank Neera for dragging me in this project. Initially, I was not hesitant, but I was afraid, because the kind of data which is there available, either that is discussed too much or nobody knows about it. So either like there were two extremes in these cases. For example, when we talked about Sopara Stupa and related material, that has been discussed by scholars in 1882. And then there is data coming to us, which is a very new data and nobody knows about it. So like it was every possible kind of archaeological data which was available to talk about Mumbai. So usually I say that Mumbai is archaeological hub because we have 226 caves, thousands of heritage buildings, 53 forts, and so on and so forth. So this statistical data itself is like these numbers, those are scary, like handling this much data. But thanks to Neera for showing me, like she showed a faith in me that I can do that, because I was really afraid. I definitely was not hesitant. I was afraid. And then Dr. Jamkhedkar, because in 2012, when Professor Dhaulikar published his book on cultural heritage of Mumbai, I was working as his research assistant. And then we had series of discussions on basically not giving justice to the intangible cultural heritage. And he said, see, I dealt with archaeology, rest is your job. You do something. And I said, like, when you publish a book, who can dare to write on the topic? Like after Professor Dhaulikar writing a 200 pages book, who would dare to write? And Neera dragged me in, and I was like, what to write? So Dr. Jamkhedkar, he said, see, there is one more, the most important thing which we should talk about in this book, and that is urbanization. Mumbai is the only city in Western India which has the culture, like urban heritage of 2,300 years. And that's true. So how can we emphasize that? So I was talking about, like I was discussing with him, and we realized that we can talk about migrants. So different, like the cultural diversity, which Neera also talked about. Then layers of migrations. So usually people say that who are the natives of Mumbai? And now after writing, at least contributing 4 chapters, I realized that there is nothing called native. We all are migrants. And we cannot just talk about henotheism or kind of thing, we need to understand it in a different perspective. So this was one thing. Other thing was the density of archaeological data which we have, which is very high. From prehistoric period, the typology is different, but density also, like we have more than 26 prehistoric sites in Mumbai Metropolitan Region. And that is amazing. Like no metropolitan region in India gives us this kind of data, like even today, in 2017, we had conducted archaeological survey and excavation at a prehistoric site in Mumbai. So this is something, makes this entire exercise unique. And one more thing I realized is there are total 64 texts coming from ancient period which talk about, which describe Mumbai. I'm not just saying there are references to Mumbai Metropolitan Region. There are passages about Mumbai talking about places, people, culture, language. And then we had to select a couple of them, like we talked about Purna's story, how the region is being pursued by Buddhists through Purna stories, and the depiction of Sopara at Ajanta, as Neera just talked about. And then also there are paintings of Sopara coming from Southeast Asia, China, because of the story of Purna. How Yuansang is what is his perception about Mumbai Metropolitan Region? So he talks about people, their nature, their language, and it's altogether a different experience. He talks about legends, he talks about folklore, which he has learned somewhere around 1400 years before present, and that's amazing. I think Mumbai is the only city which gives us this kind of diverse literary tradition associated with it. Though this is so, definitely the words are not mine. That is Mitra and Parama who could verbalize my whatever I had written. Definitely, I'm not a language person, and that was another a difficult task, because it was exactly they had to edit my text and bring out the meaning out of whatever I have written, and also the same meaning which I wanted to say. So Neera again took a lot of efforts in that. Every time we used to talk, do you mean to say this out of it? Yes, I do. I do, or I do not. And then we used to get back and forth. And another person to whom I'm going to talk now is Archana. Hats off to her patience. I had troubled her like anything, because many times I want this photograph in this angle. Please do that. And she had clicked, she had made people work day and night to get that photograph in that angle, because the argument was simple from her side. If Suraj wants it, probably there is a need of that and there is a reason for that. So I will try to understand the reason and I'll get it. And thanks, Archana, for each and every effort you have put in. Because in this book, the layout, the designing is equally important, because as words, content, definitely myself, Neera, we have been working, Neera has worked day and night on it. But the justice to the book has been given by you all. I have just given a storyline, and like a skeleton. You all have put on flesh and everything on it. My job was to handle the diverse data, archaeological data, and intangible heritage associated with it. So this is definitely a learning experience. I will not say this was a learning experience, because while reading book again and again, I realized that a lot has to be worked upon, a long way to go, because after completion of this book, I wrote a column in Lokmat on cultural heritage of Mumbai, and then I covered certain aspects which I realized that those should have been incorporated in the book. But even today I feel that the column which I wrote for Lokmat should be revised. So that is how I think we academicians grow. And thanks Neera, for giving me this opportunity and making me realize that yes, we need to work on cities like metropolitan city of Mumbai. And on this moment, on the last point, I would like to say that we should congratulate ourselves, Neera, because there is a book on Pune, there is a book on Kolhapur, and there is a book on Aurangabad is being prepared on the same lines. So we have set the ball rolling. That's all. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Suraj. I mean, uh, of course, I mean, one is Suraj also kind of runs the Bombay local history group. He's also a member of the local history group, and then every time you speak to Suraj is full of new evidences of some relic or some tombstone or some some small pottery part or and a whole series of things. And the thing with Bombay is that it kind of, there were no big wars in Bombay. So the layers got settled one over the other. So if you dig deep, then there will be something you kind of get. Not dig deep actually, but conceptually dig deep. You will get things. And this is something which, and here is where I want to invite Archana to kind of, because Suraj also mentioned the difficulty of photographing evidences which were hidden, which were hidden by layers of life, actually. So Archana, you want to one is of course photographing archaeological evidences as well as other historical evidences, but also I wanted to kind of come in and talk about the form of the book. It's not a usual book. It's not a usual history book, or it's not a usual social science book. Nor it is a coffee table like Neera would say. It's not a coffee table. It's kind of it's very rich and dense in what it is trying to do. And it has a whole artistic dimension. Every page is an artwork by itself. Like, how does it? How do you want to kind of talk about the form of this book also? So, two questions to you. I mean, two kind of lead points to you. The problem of photographing evidence, which is kind of so much layered, and second is on the form of the book.
Just to take from your point is one is thank you, Prasad, to organize this, because I really it was due for many years, I think, to be launched like this. So when it comes to this hidden Bombay, in anywhere there is a building which falls and they dig up, there is some history below it. And that again becomes one, especially in North Bombay. It's very interesting. So I always say, good, it is going for redevelopment, that excavation will happen and something will be found beneath the ground, So just to complete that, what you were saying about the hidden layers, multi-layers. So to look at the form of the book, it's unimaginable in today's day that we did this. One is me being this adamant artist, then Suraj being this historian and archaeologist with this pakka data, with total authenticity, with his knowledge, and one of the most brilliant storyteller. Okay, and I have been in my own world experimenting with Neera being this architect plus historian plus activist, and then Parama coming as a researcher. It's a kind of, everybody had a kind of baggage, okay, and they put it in one place. Now you have to sort it out and do what is also, but then also, very interestingly, that everybody had invested on the city. And it was a huge investment. It was not that if someone has worked for 1 year or 2 years, 20 years, 30 years has been, people have been working on this city who have come together, which is also a problem, and also it becomes very easy. That the problem is editing, because there's too much of material. I can make one more book. I'd suggested Neera, we should make 2 volumes. You know, it is so much of material already existing here. But then also the thought was like, it has to be the city archive. Now the archive becomes also very important. Then the found images, which also becomes the source. Then the contemporary new photographs, which are photographed, which also deals with 2,500 years. It is not just vanished. There are some things remaining, and then the contemporary also is there. So there are many layers in one photograph. And that was also a huge challenge. Also, this whole book has to be read by every generation, everybody, like even a student can get benefit, and also a researcher or a photographer or somebody who is new to the city. It's a kind of challenge which really, initially I tried designing it to make it look like a design book, but then I left it because it cannot be that kind of executive design book. The images, the text, the archive, the history, everything has to lead the book. So every chapter goes back to 2,500 and contemporary. So that balance needs to be there. Then we had to really recreate a lot of graphics and everything. To get the form, at least I would have taken 2 years. To be really frank to it. Photography must have taken 4.5 years. It is not because the timing of permissions. One is completely a different, we should have one seminar on that, I would say, that what is permission on the heritage. Photographing a heritage old space with new elements. Now you cannot say that some flag I don't need, or this man I don't need. It is not possible. Actually, in this pandemic, I was thinking this was the time to photograph Bombay. It would have been much easier to really photograph it. Then also the weather and all those things, people curious. And in the photography level, the difficulties, because it was extremely challenging to photograph these sites. One is, you won't get a permission for a light because these are heritage spots. You can't have light. You have to depend on the natural light. Of course, a lot of, like Swapnil has invested on lot of images we took from ages. He's been photographing. A lot of people contributed from there, very generous. Actually, in this book, we just felt people were very generous in supporting and donating, like Firoza Godrej, and all that archive came into, of course, some of it, Suraj would say, oh, this is not true. This angle of this drawing is really bad. But then it was imagined by the artist of that time, But interestingly, in the photograph, when Suraj or Neera would talk about a site or a location, Suraj, of course, talks in so much detail that you are in that period itself. You go to that period and you are being that character. You can visualize it, right? That's why when he insisted on some angle, there is no question that it cannot be. So Suraj, don't be thanking me. I have to thank you, because 2,500 years of history and the sites which we had never come across, we came across through you. So you were like a guide. I always say that whenever, Suraj, you want any high resolution for any of your publication, you should ask me. I will give free, because he is like a teacher, master is. But then again, in the island city, how Neera would look into the architectural part. That was very interesting, with a lot of history which she herself was part of it, right? So it is kind of very, very balancing of many languages in one book. That then I allowed the book to be flowing one after another, making graphics to break to the next language. And to come into the question of, and also it was not easy for 8 chapters. It was like, it's extremely less. As Suraj is right, saying that we have so much of material more to write about. Now, actually, we should write. It is, now is the right time to write in a way, because we have the material, right? But when you're photographing, when Suraj talks about a story, or Neera is talking about a story, Paroma has invested on so much of when during the cinema city, looking at the city, and she's telling a story. Myself have a story, and I revisit that site. It's completely different. You have another story coming along with what they have instructed. So the place itself have added or changed its identity, as Suraj might be more be able to say. And I always had this talk with Suraj that some headstone or some Virgals would have been, people are praying, and he would say it's all Virgal rubbish, they're praying, but it has changed the idea of the Virgal, or it has been part of a swimming pool as a design, and then the same swimming pool which has these blue tiles, suddenly they realize, oh, this is Shiva or something, and they started praying. Then some, the stupa, they thought it is Shivlinga. So it's a kind of what do you call a abstraction or a distortion. So I wouldn't, thankfully, none of us really looked at that this is the right roots of it, and we have to claim the roots. Thankfully, we definitely spoke about the history through the contemporary urban. So the urban sector was all through as a link, which we could connect from early to now. Younger generation photographers whom I involved later, like Amshu Chukki and all, they really contributed to they also learned in the process of looking at the sites. So I hope people start buying it and enjoying it and being in the library, which we had intentions of. There are lots of stories, Prasad. Suraj falling down, getting up, getting hurt. So all these kind of things also is very interesting. Making of this book, we should actually make a documentary, or we should make a book on its own. Because when Suraj tried to figure those new caves, not new caves, the old caves in Kanheri, and he would give me an assignment. I was exactly a student. I was so happy to be a student. Said, photograph this, and I need these, and he would escape into the jungles, So those stories could have been interesting to have a kind of supplementary, to this book. Yeah, thank you, Prasad.
Thanks, Archana. Thanks. We'll extend this discussion by 10 minutes because I mean, like Suraj said, 7 years. How do we kind of compress it in 1 hour? It's impossible. So we'll extend it. And it's you said something very important, Archana. The whole idea that the people who made this book are the ones who had stakes in the city. The ones who have practices in the city, ones who are invested in the city. And it shows in the book. It shows in the orientation. It shows in the and in many ways the book also kind of holds that incoherence of the practices. Holds the incoherences of the stories that come from practices and stakes actually. So I want to invite Mitra here because Mitra I think accompanied the book and its making throughout, and read it several times and kind of, went through the drafts and also kind of, put things together. So tell us, about the coming together of this book. Tell us about the methodological coming together, because you had on one hand you had an archaeologist, a kind of a committed archaeologist who kind of doesn't stop even he's kind of injured several times in finding new caves, and then you had Archana, a hardcore artist, trying to kind of figure out the correct angle and spending days and days on one side, and then you had Neera, who's kind of an architect, a social worker, kind of a organizer, and they're coming with their practices, they're coming with their methods, their own kind of, how does it come together, methodologically and conceptually, Mitra?
Okay, amazing is the word I'll say. Unlike almost everyone in the panel, I entered it midstream, so to speak. Not only midstream, I would say towards the end stream. So I have been more like a witness and a privileged reader. I have seen towards the end all the tensions and the fine tuning that all these amazing people did. I'm not using the word amazing in order to praise my friends. They are all very good, close friends. But I think this has been a task, which a humongous task, which they have done with so much of delicacy and grace that I was really, really speaking a privileged reader when I entered into it almost in the last 1 and 2 years of towards the end. But before I go into it, I just want to take a minute, Prashad, to say thank you, of course, to all of you. But more importantly, it being such a special day, it's my friend Arvind's 75th birthday, and it is through him and with him that I have been able to develop, amongst many others, of course, Neera and various other friends, develop my interest in urban studies and have extended it much beyond what only literary studies enable. And it is through Arvind that we designed courses in which literature and architecture students got together and explored the city and studied about it. So this is really a fitting day for me to have been invited to speak a little about this. But to go back to the book, yes, I did come in at a very, very late stage, and I was overwhelmed with the kind of work, Archana's amazing handling, and what stupendous designing, forming, structuring, Neera's ability to balance so much material in terms and acknowledging the work of the artist as well as the historian and her own developed interest and evolving ideas. Now, I would, because we have very little time, I would like to take some of the points that they have been talking about, and as looking at the book, there are a couple of things which needs to be immediately highlighted. And this is of interest not only within urban studies in India, but across global and international areas. One most important, I mean, among the many, I'm just going to point out 2 or 3 important ideas which clearly comes out in terms of the content and the form of the book. One is that it challenges the notion of the urban. Urban is always associated in our mind because of our long traditions of coloniality, the hegemonic practice of European, and Anglo-American dominations across in scholarship is always associated somehow or the other related to modernity. But this notion of the urban across 2,500 years, across different political, religious and social systems, and is something which is palpable in the book. And that needs to be taken notice of. That needs to be taken notice of at the immediate level, because it challenges, as Neera rightly pointed out, the centrality of Mumbai only as a city center. You discover that it has this cosmopolitanism and this urbanity of Mumbai is something which it has accrued across time and across spatial locations. And all of this has now become part of what we have got as a legacy in Mumbai. But these centers, as Suraj has also pointed out, were equally thriving urban centers, and the characteristics of that urban needs to be also acknowledged and considered as urban. That is one point. So the notion of urban is not fixed. Cannot be generalized. It is not a universal urban. We are talking about the contextual urban, the evolving urban, the urban that changes across time, urban that changes with the change in a political scenario or an economic scenario, it across history and time. This is very, very important, which we need to keep in mind. And the multi-layeredness of this urbanity is to be also acknowledged, because without understanding the multi-layeredness of the urban, we will fall into the trap of consider X or Y as the final definition of the urban. The second thing that needs to be also looked at, very quickly related to it, I don't want to go into the detail of it, that what is it, this cosmopolitanism, which cannot anymore be challenged or politically defined. This definition of the cosmopolitanism itself does not allow or any singular definitions. And this challenge that the book brings out is important for one to note. Let me go to the third most important point, which Archana has been talking about. And I think Archana did a marvelous job in bringing out that history usually is based on evidenced, and Suraj also has talked about it, but let me add a little to it, that evidenced reports is the methodology of history. But this is getting more and more challenged across the world in several ways. For the first time in this book, I think this methodology of looking beyond the evidenced, beyond the tangible, beyond merely that which can be proved. Evidence is available in fragments. Evidence is available in hand-drawn maps, narratives of different kinds, both oral as well as popular and folk. Narratives that come out of stone, sculptures, archaeology. All of this becomes the predominant narrative of the book. The unheard voices, the voices which you have to assume, that which provokes you to imagine the untold stories of something which is available as a stone object. But you have to go beyond the dimensions of the stone object into the shadows of that stone object. That is something which was so delightfully brought in, both by, I think Paroma did a wonderful job in putting all of that into the text and making sure that that gets highlighted. Archana did that with her design and her evidence of putting across so many photographs which I had never imagined anybody could take. And Neera's, of course, entire balancing of it. I think these things need to be spoken of. And as a privileged reader, first reader, I would like to bring this to the fore. The third thing, and I'll stop there, is that it raises a whole deal of questions about demographics. It raises a whole deal of questions about what happened, what happens when you read a history, when you construct a history through the built structure and the lived experiences, which these built structures invariably communicate and convey. And this is something which the book palpably brings out. Now, to just give you one example, which has been given, because it has been mentioned, I'm giving this example, the story of Punna. Now, look at it. You have, during the monasteries, getting patronized by a variety of people. And you come across stories where women become the patron and therefore define or command or share or shape the outlook, perspective, as well as probably the structure of the monasteries. Nowhere in history do we come across the idea that how much women might have, or certain communities might have, or certain financial or practical needs shaped these built structures. What becomes palpable in the book is some of these ideas, and they are very clearly and very outrageously at times, breaking all kinds of rules for which often and most often we had a lot of trouble with the so-called authorities, because we were breaking rules, we're breaking the rules of the box, going out of the box. So that becomes palpable and clear in the book. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitra, thanks. I wanted to bring in Paroma here because she actually kind of, put the book together, like really kind of, worked through the mechanics of it, worked out the nuts and bolts, and worked out the chapters, but the nuts and bolts really. Paroma, you want to kind of, come in, the not the challenges, but the conceptually, what happens when you have these three practices, three people who are kind of, saying strange things and encountering each other, in very interesting ways. So how does it kind of, what happens?
Well, thanks, Prasad. I don't think there is, I don't think I'd be able to give a blueprint for for future books ever. I don't think any one of us can. But I think what happened in this journey of this collaboration that has happened, in the beginning, I was working with Neera and with Amita in just compiling the information in the chapters, a lot that came from Suraj and a lot of the work that was being done by Neera and her office. So once we had done that and we'd gone back and forth on a lot of the information, and of course this idea of talking about the urbanism from the beginning till now and breaking the idea of modernity was there, but we weren't so, we were a little more loose about it. However, we put it all together and then gave it to Archana for kind of framing it in the design that she was going to conjure up. And I think the book really took off from there. So the text and the image is like, I don't know, two dialects working together in this book, so to speak. So you have to be someone, and that's where a lot of these keywords that have been spoken about today, including layering, including migration, it's kind of, I hope that the text and the visual together is evocative of that. Because that is what the challenge and the exciting part of the book ended up becoming. So not just the editing and, the grammar and things like that, which of course was essential, but trying to link these two together. So essentially at the very end, we have spent months just working on the InDesign file. checking. Archana is like, you cannot cut it more. I mean, I need at least one column of text. So in cases there has been no text and we don't know what to fill it with, and in cases there's been too much text and like we don't want to cut it, but Archana is like, you have to cut it. My page nation goes bananas. So that I think is it was a challenge and the really exciting part of the book. And trying to through that process is how everyone's voice and everyone's priorities kind of came to the fore. Mitra, I think, was completely instrumental in pulling all of us out of the jadedness that we may have been getting into at some point, right towards the fag end, and kind of pointing out all the things that one would have, maybe missed because of fatigue that we were feeling at some point. Of course, the academic rigor in the book is like Mitra's full support. So I won't take more time. It's just a super exciting, challenging collaboration, but I am so happy that the book is out. Thank you. Prasad, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thanks, Parama. I want to get Neera. I mean, we focused on the first 1,500 years of history in this discussion, and I felt that your section, which is basically the last 4 parts, which is kind of which is coming from your from your life practice, that kind of that also gets held in a very interesting way in this book, no, Neera, in the stories of mill worker, the trade unionists, and buildings, and women, and a whole series of things in this book. You want to spend 2 minutes talking about it before we close?
Well, of course, in addition to the mill workers and the chawls and the sings and so on, it was also the freedom movement, the Sanyukta Maharashtra movement, which has not been covered earlier anywhere, but this is very much part of the history of the city. And so that was I mean, I was very keen that it should come, and it should come across vividly. Thanks to Comrade G.L. Reddy, who's no more, but he had handed over all his photographs to me, and so I've returned them. But they're very, very, very precious. The inner city of the island city of Bombay, that was very important. Again, that was a very unique contribution to this book, because going to Madanpura and Agripada to meet the Jews, or going to, I mean, I remember going to Siddhi Mohalla or the Hapshi Dargah, and I went there, and there were all women mostly frequent that dargah, and the in charge was there, and I asked him, I said, are there any Siddhis or Hapshis living here? And he said, of course, I'm one of them. And the whole stereotype which we have of a Siddhi with curly hair and stout structure and very, very dark skin, it wasn't there, because over generations you really cannot, this transformation happening, this palimpsest we are talking about, we could actually see in the communities as well. There are many communities which were earlier never mentioned, like a Telugu community, Telugu Mundarvar community, and this. So that I think gets mentioned in the book.
Then mute.
So it's late, and I don't think there are questions. I
just want to add one thing, that I'm sure tomorrow somebody will say, why you didn't put that. We would say, I'm sorry, we couldn't, because it was so much of data. I think we have missed many too. I just want to be sure, disclaimer.
Yeah, no, actually, based on this book, there can be many books can emerge out of this, I mean, emerge meaning not literally from this book, but similar kind of approach and similar kind of vision towards a notion of heritage and so on. So it should become easier now to bring out other books.
Can I just add a line here?
Sure, Amita, please.
In fact, when we were going through all these discussions in the initial stage, And we had this voluminous data, a lot of data. So, all along, of course, we felt that there was so many visuals which need to come in, and there is so much material by way of text which has to come in. And all of us felt that maybe it was easier making a film, not that making film is easy, but probably then we could, that juxtaposition becomes that much easier, was a thought. So
I'm very happy we didn't make a film. It would not have been.
I agree. I agree.
Can I add something?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, continuing with Archana's point, like how photography was difficult to get photographs of any building. I will give just two examples. Once I was photographing Agripada police station, but since we have a lot of experience of photographing architecture buildings, so I was hiding somewhere, but suddenly a policeman saw me, and he just, without asking me anything, two policemen just picked me up, grabbed me and put it into the jail. Then I was there for 2 hours explaining them who I am, what I'm doing, because there was no letter stating that I'm photographing this book for MMRDA work and everything. So finally, some inspector realized. So I told him, if you want, you can call the concerned author, Neera Adarkar, and you can verify all those things. So that was where one instance I went to jail for, say, 25 minutes.
Some of the mosques, near some mosques also we had a problem.
Yes.
But Amshu, like person, I made him look like tourist and sent him. So you could.
Yeah. And one, I was doing photograph of Crawford Market. So there is one, like there's across the Crawford Market, there's a commissioner's office or a police main office, and there's a raised platform. So I just went early morning. I climbed on that platform, and immediately two traffic police came again. Why are you clicking this? Suddenly I realized the conservation work had just happened. So I just told him, I am from that same office who has worked on that building. So he just let me off. Otherwise, that was the second time I would be back in jail for some time.
I think it's high time that all of you all should meet each other, and come together, because it's so nice to kind of sorry, yeah. It's so nice it's so nice that you'll talk about each other like this so fondly. It's interesting, kind of, and obviously there must have been solid differences and solid, arguments and all kinds of things, I'm sure. But I think the book will remain durable for a long time, and it has kind of, it has kind of, put in place a way of looking at cities, its histories and urbanity, which is very specific to our regions and our lives, actually. And I think that's one big intervention, methodological as well as conceptual intervention, and how do you kind of tie this together and kind of and I would say, you can read it as in many ways. You can read it as a picture book. You can read it as a series of stories on the city. You can read it as an academic work with a lot of references. You can do a lot of things with the book, and like Neera said, like Amita mentioned, there are plenty of doors that the book opens for many more research work, and the book remains very active, conceptually, actually. So wonderful, guys. And any last word, Neera? Anything? Neera is frozen. Okay. So wonderful. We're already 20 minutes late, actually. So, but I think it was a nice chat, and I would urge really everybody to kind of get their copies. It's available on Amazon. It's very, very competitively priced for what it is. I don't think it even covers the printing costs. I'm sure it doesn't cover the printing costs even of the book, because it's done by the state, and it is kind of it is basically kind of an offering to the city. And the problem with that is it might never be produced again, it might never be published again. So that's another dimension to, and nobody can ever access its copyrights, so to publish it or republish it. So get your copies while it is there, and let's figure out a way to kind of make this book live much longer. Thank you so much, everybody, and we meet again next Friday with another CE event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.